All right, we're on air. It is Thursday, January 29th. We are having a Backdrop CMS weekly status meeting. It has been 2 weeks since the release of Backdrop 1.0, which is super exciting. So we're going to go through a couple of high-level items to discuss today. One thing that I've been asked to mention at the beginning of meetings is if anyone is on the meeting now or joins the meeting later, so you may not hear this, but just in general, please mute yourself when you join. We've had in the past a couple of instances of people being outside or having some background noise, which makes the videos that are posted on YouTube hard for people to watch later. So I'm going to try and be better about asking people to mute, and hopefully that'll start to be a thing where everything will sound better long term. So the first item on our agenda every week is updates from the project management committee, and a lot of times there's a lot of silence there because we don't have anything super important we need to talk about. This week we had a couple of things happen that are both good and bad. The first thing is that we've had a whole bunch of activity in Backdrop since Backdrop has been out, which is great. Part of that activity is a whole bunch of new people coming into Backdrop, working on things, porting modules, creating new themes, and requesting access to join the Backdrop contributed group on GitHub. And we have a pretty straightforward process for that. You just ask for access and we ask to see your code. We'll do a really quick spot check review just to make sure that you understand the significant differences between Backdrop and Drupal. The review is really more to help you than it is anything else. And then once we've looked at your code, confirmed that you're willing to agree to the agreement that is part of being part of Backdrop group, then we grant you permission. But this week we had one person in particular who applied to the group and then wouldn't work with us in order to get through that process to get granted access. And so we started kind of evaluating, like, well, maybe we should have some more rigorous standards. Maybe we need a code of conduct. Maybe we need some more clear definitions of what it means to be part of this group. And going through that process, we realized that three things were going to be super important to us as a community going forward. The first one is the ability to communicate clearly in an issue queue. So if someone asks a question and someone gives an answer, and then someone asks the question again, and then someone gives the answer in a different way, and that continues for a really long period of time, if there's a problem with that communication happening, that's going to be a problem for the community as a whole, is how do you get anything done if you can't communicate clearly in the issue queue. We know some people don't have English as their first language, and we are generally trying to be as accommodating as possible for those people communicating in English, maybe not usually speaking in English, but just being able to make progress in that queue is important. The second thing is supervision, so the ability to share and work on things together. If someone says, hey, can I see your code? The answer should be, sure, here's my code, especially if it's going to be open source code anyway, and we're going to be sharing in the long term. If you say, hey, can I see your code? And someone says no for various different reasons, we'll try and get to the bottom of what the reasons are, try and work out any issues with, why that code doesn't want to be shared. And figure out if there's a way we can help get through that. But at some point, if you're not going to share your code, that's not very collaborative, and that's going to be a problem as well. And then the third thing is making sure that people, and this is the most important one, making sure that people have respect for each other. So we're going to be a community of a bunch of different developers of various different skill sets, experiences, whatever. People are really proud of their work. You do a bunch of work, you port something to Backdrop, you write something new, you post it. You don't want to have someone who is a talented developer look at a junior developer's code and say, this is broken, or this is equivalent to like a dev release on Drupal.org. It needs to be the kind of thing where, yeah, sometimes code doesn't work well, sometimes it's not done yet, but helping people through that process of making code better in a way that is positive is going to be super important. Having respect for the work that people have put in, whether it's finished or in progress, whether it's good quality work or just your first work. Making sure we have respect for each other's work, and respect for each other in how you treat each other in the issue queue is also something that's really important. And we ran into all three of these problems with this one application where we were having problems communicating, problems collaborating, and didn't see a respect for other developers. And so we decided to reject this person's application for access to the contrib group. We also decided that no rejection in any application should be final. So it's basically just a delay that says, hey, these are the problems we're having today. you can have a 30-day grace period, and then you can try and apply again. And if the second application doesn't have any of those problems, we can communicate clearly, we're able to collaborate, you understand how to be respectful for other developers, you get a second shot. So no one is ever completely nixed from the Backdrop community, but we do want to kind of set some standards about how people and code should be treated. And so along those lines, we are now also working on a code of conduct. We have a couple of really great sources to start from. I have one here on GitHub that we used for BadCamp last year, which I think is a great starting point. It is at codeofconduct.com. We're going to adapt a little bit to work for communities and not just conferences. And we're going to try and make that Backdrop's code of conduct. We'll post it somewhere clearly too. So it's kind of a trying process for us to try and figure out, like, if we should reject someone, if we should, what are our reasons for that, and how do we solve this in a way that is not too off-putting to the person who is applying, like we want them to come back and try again in a month, but does set a standard for how people should be treated in the Backdrop community. So that's kind of a big important update there from the PMC. And I don't know, Nate, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, yeah, let's also add that it's not a very complicated process to go through to get access to the Contrib repository. And there's also, we make it really clear at the top of the repository application repository, I guess it is, the issue queue that we use for managing who gets access to the repository, that you don't need access to it in the first place to share your code. You can put your code anywhere you want. This is really just a central, well, it's the only central location we have now until we build out the repository on backdropcms.org. So there is some value there that it will make it so people can find your modules. But the purpose of this group is to allow people to collaborate together and to share the responsibility of module maintenance, and to help it so that if we need to make security updates within the Contrib repository, that other people are empowered to do that besides the original author of the module. So the entire Contrib group exists for the purposes of collaboration, but if you just want to share your code, then you can just put that wherever you would like.
And so also that'll help us a lot with abandoned projects. If you have a super important project to the community and you disappear, if that code lives only in your personal repository, we're going to have to fork it in order to have someone maintain that, and that is a little yucky in terms of managing the issue queue and all of that stuff. But if you put that code into the Backdrop Contrib repository and then go on vacation for a couple of years, we can then reassign that project to another maintainer for a period of time, or indefinitely if we need to move stuff around. So it does help us with abandoned projects if it's all in the group. It helps us with security, and it helps us with collaboration. So we would like to encourage that people put their contributed modules, especially ones that are going to be super important, into this group, but it is by no means a requirement. If you have a company policy that your contributed code needs to be under your company's account, that's also perfectly fine. And once we do have module listings on backdropcms.org, there will be a place in there where you can create basically a node for your project, and you can link to its canonical source. So if that source is not Backdrop Contrib, you can list that there. Obviously, right now we don't have that tool built yet, so the canonical source for everything is in this Backdrop Contrib group for now, but we will get that up before too long, and hopefully that'll help resolve some of these issues. So although there's a whole bunch of work happening right now, and there's a whole bunch of reports going on, and there's a whole bunch of people collaborating in the Contrib group, which is good, that is not the only way to do things. So if you apply to the Backdrop Contrib group and for whatever reason you end up being one of these edge cases that gets rejected, that doesn't mean you can't contribute your code to Backdrop. It just means it won't go in that group for now. And then a month from now, if you want to apply again, it can. So, yeah. Sad, but I think it was important for us to come to the realization that we did need a code of conduct, and we do need to have some standards around how people should be treated. So that's good.
Yeah, one more thing on the good news side of things is a status report on how many people we've had join. In the past 2 weeks, we've had 12 new people join the Contrib group, which is fantastic. And in that time, they've ported or have started porting 29 total projects. which is fantastic. A lot of those like top 10 contributed modules are well underway. We've got 3 or 4 themes that are underway that have been, actually a couple of them are complete full ports. And it's just really exciting that in that very short window of time, a lot of people, this is the very first time they've looked at Backdrop in the last 2 weeks since Backdrop came out. And in that time, they've already not only downloaded and installed Backdrop, but they've managed to do a port of their code from Drupal 7 to Backdrop in that time. So that's a huge accomplishment that just that short window, they're able to not only download and use Backdrop, but they're also able to port all of their code to Backdrop. And I think that that validates a lot of everything that we've been working towards for the last year and a half, making it so that people had an easy way forward to another platform that will be sustained for a long time to come. So I'm really excited, and I think the ease of porting has already really kind of proven itself, although a lot of our ports really, they're still, I mean, they still need some work. But they're all making a lot of really great progress in a really short amount of time, and I'm just thrilled with the amount of progress we've been making in core and now in contrib. Very exciting.
Yay. All right, so that's the end of our PMC updates. A lot of good stuff, a little worrisome stuff, but I think we got it all under control. Next on our agenda here is that we have upcoming releases. We have a patch release. We haven't yet determined the date for our next patch release because we don't have any super serious bugs that need to be fixed urgently. We did find some bugs since the last patch release, and we have started fixing them, but we don't have anything that's urgent enough that we need to schedule a new patch release, which is good. If anyone is using Backdrop and you have discovered a bug that you think is super problematic and urgent, let us know. File it in the issue queue. We'll fix it, and we'll get a release out shortly. So that's our process there for that. Our next minor release will be released on May 15th, and that should be 1.1.0. Things on the agenda for that release, let's see, this is lower in the meeting here, but we're currently planning on including a built-in rich text editor, a version of the token module. There's already token support in core, but we want to get the token UI and a little more support for tokens into core. And then we want to include Path Auto module. And so our process for that is first things first, we're going to port these modules to Backdrop, and we do have beginnings of both of them in the Backdrop contrib repository. This is not the form these things are going to be in when they get into core. We're going to refactor them a little bit as they go into core, make the user interfaces more integrated with where they're supposed to be changing stuff and maybe even pare down features. We'll see how much of it we can get in. But the first thing is to get them ported. So that is underway. The rich text editor, that's not something we have necessarily a module in Drupal 7 that would be an exact port. We have some expertise, though, on the team of how we can take our starting point Drupal 7 module and get it into a state that we think is suitable for Backdrop. So we will be working on that here in the next few months, too. Hopefully we can get that in. If not, that might be something that gets pushed to a 1.2 release, depending on how close we can get with token and Path Auto. Other things that may or may not be on the chopping block are getting a new administrative look. We've already got a bunch of feedback that they think it's weird that Backdrop looks like Drupal 7. We also think it's weird that Backdrop looks like Drupal 7. We have a style guide that's getting worked on as we speak, that's getting some new admin elements added to make them look more Backdrop-y and less Drupal-y. And then we have someone on hand who's ready to help us figure out how to get these style guide changes into our administration experience in Backdrop. And we've got 2 current approaches on the table. We could either add a new administration theme and set that theme to be the default administration theme for new Backdrop installs. So in terms of experience for existing users, when you do install the newest version of Backdrop, under the theme section in the administration dropdown, there would be 2 items to list instead of 1. You could just toggle it. And another option, which I think might be a little slicker, is if we were able to merge a lot of these changes into either the 7 theme or into core where they come from. And some of these things like that have been bothering me for a really long time are like the styles for tabs. So like on the front end of your site, there's this really old style square blocky tab thing. We could change that style in core And it would probably be fine as long as we aren't changing markup changes. If we're changing the CSS that comes out of core. If anyone's overridden the style of those tabs, it'll continue to be overridden. It wouldn't break anything. But we might get that initial experience of editing a node to be a little less clunky for people and look a little more backdroppy. So we'll have to take every one of these style elements that we get new styles for in our style guide and try and figure out if it's even possible to change it in the way that we want to change it without changing the markup around it too. So we've got someone on hand to help us make those decisions, but first things first, we need to get the style guide done. So hopefully that will get done this week, and then we'll be able to start thinking about technical implementation details. So again, we'll see how much of that we can get done by 1.1, but I think it is very important for our product to look like our product and not another product. So we'll see. We'll see where that ends up. Other stuff that we're continually working on in Backdrop, I don't know, I'll just keep working through stuff we're working on in Backdrop, is user experience improvements and developer experience improvements. A lot of user experience improvements we can get into the 1.0 version because they're just things like making, when you hit a save button, like what actually happens, where do you get redirected to, stuff like that, and it doesn't require any API changes. Developer experience changes are much harder to get into 1.0 because sometimes they involve refactoring how code is written or how code works, and that sometimes will break APIs. So if you're a developer and you're working on Backdrop and you find something confusing, open an issue, we'll evaluate it and see if that's something we can fix soon or if that's something that has to be fixed in 2.0. But it is something that we are constantly thinking about, is how do we make this code easier for people to learn, easier to work with, all of that stuff. So those are two ongoing issues we're working on, and we have, for those two kinds of issues, we don't have tags in our queue, but the issues start with square brackets and either UX or DX at the top. So if you're particularly interested in either one of those two things and want to work on them, you can search the issue queue for square bracket UX, square bracket, or square bracket DX, square bracket, and you can help us solve some of these problems too. So, okay, that's what we're working on in Backdrop itself. We also have a bunch of other stuff that we're working on now that Backdrop is out that helps support our community. So rather than just being Backdrop, the software, we have to think about all of the stuff the people working on Backdrop also need. And first on our list of priorities of that, I think, is Drush. Drush is something that I use every day on my Drupal sites. I will really seriously be sad if we can't get some equivalent thing for Backdrop as opposed to for Drupal. And so we've been making a bunch of progress in the Drush queue. You guys who were here last week heard us talk about how we've gotten some feedback from Greg Anderson, who's one of the Drush maintainers, about how refactoring Drush to remove the Drupal from it, or at least abstract the Drupal in a way that we could swap it out with something that's not Drupal, like something that's Backdrop, has been on the Drush maintainers to-do list for a really long time. They merged a patch, I think, back in June or July that started on that refactoring so that Drush could support Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. Actually, I think it had been supporting them both before that anyway, but this is kind of to ease that pain. But it never got fully completed, and so there were some other people who wanted to run Drush on some really strange platforms like a Symfony-based Drupal 7 who waited in the queue and said, we need this for this, and then we came in and said we want it for Backdrop, and so there's a whole bunch of people who are kind of working towards the same goals. We've got some feedback from Greg on how to make that happen. We've got someone in the queue who wants to make it work for Backdrop working on it, helping refactor, which is great. And so what it looks like we're going to be able to do is include some kind of a backdrop.drush.inc file in Backdrop, so that when you fire up Drush, it'll be able to tell that we're running a Backdrop site and not a Drupal site. It'll be able to locate all of the core files, like in Backdrop they're in a core directory, and it'll be able to swap out all of the Drupal-specific behaviors with Backdrop-specific behaviors. So when you do a Drush CCL, instead of calling a Drupal cache clear, it'll call a Backdrop cache clear. And there's just one class that we can swap out in Drupal. It's a class that calls a bunch of Drupal functions. In Backdrop, it'll be a class that calls a bunch of Backdrop functions. And it should be fairly uncomplicated in theory in order to just write that class and put it in our backdrop.drush.inc file in core. So all we need to do is clean up Drush and then make sure that the file, the inc file, is able to be located. And right now, Drush already searches a Drush folder for this ink file. So what we could do short term to get Drush working is depend on a contributed module that specifically says, like, you must install this file in this folder, or here's this folder, put it in your Drupal root. And then you could get Drush working right away. And then as soon as we get Drush set up so that it can scan your site for that ink file, which it doesn't currently do, we can then move that ink file into core. So I think that we have like a short-term contrib solution path that we can work on, and a longer-term Drush support and core path that we can work on as well. And so there's been a bunch of progress on that, I think, over the weekend. I'm not sure anyone's had any time since Monday to work on it, but we are solving the Drush problem for Backdrop, which is super exciting, and in a way that the Drush maintainers wanted solved anyway. So we can put the Backdrop specific code in Backdrop and just let Drush be Drush, and I think that keeps everyone super happy. So I'm really excited about getting Drush for Backdrop. So big update on that. Other stuff that we're working on, we have an update server for Backdrop that currently, when your site checks to see if it's up to date, it returns a message saying not implemented. So we need to implement that. It's not something we've been working on in the past 2 weeks, but if we have anyone that wants to help us work on an update server, we could use that. We do need to do a little bit of thinking about how Backdrop determines which version is running and how Backdrop determines which versions of modules it's running. Right now, all of our modules are in the Backdrop contrib repository, and I think none of them contain a version number. Version numbers were something that was added on Drupal.org by the packaging script. We obviously don't have a packaging script on GitHub that packages in version numbers. So we could either try and make one, which is one option, or we could require that people who are releasing specific versions of modules tag them as such, and we could use the tag from Git. Or we could require that people who are working on specific versions of modules add that version string into their info file, which I think is the easiest thing for us to do short term. So we need to figure out, a short-term solution for this, and then kind of the best practices long-term solution, and work towards that as well. So those things need to be figured out, as well as actually building the server that checks the updates, that notifies your website that it needs updates. So there's a lot of work to do on that front. And I think if we can get anyone to volunteer to work for that, that would be a big help for us as well. Another thing that we need to do, and this should be something that's fairly quick, but we haven't gotten any traction on it yet, is creating an official GitHub service for Backdrop, so that when you create a module theme or layout for Backdrop, you can tell GitHub that this is for Backdrop. And then what happens is when we build our module list on our primary website, it can just go to GitHub and say, hey, get me all the things that exist for Backdrop. And anything that exists for Backdrop would have a return element in our search that would say, hey, by the way, there's this thing that someone has designated as being a thing for Backdrop, and we can put it into the list. And that would be equivalent to a sandbox project on Drupal.org. So all you need to do is check the box, and then you have a sandbox project. And then official projects, again, you'll be able to create a node for. You can define a canonical source if it's not GitHub. So there are other ways to list things that aren't part of GitHub and maybe don't have that box checked. But getting the box, I think, is going to be important. So if we have someone, there's some really good examples on GitHub. All you need to do is fork their project, add your item into a list, and then apply a pull request. I don't know the language it's written in, but I think that it would be fairly easy to handle, even if you don't. So it could be worth a shot for anyone if we want to get moving on that. Other good news, so our API website has been ported from Drupal 7 to Backdrop. Nate, I don't know if you want to talk more about that, since you were the one that made it happen.
Yeah, there's not much to it. api.backdropcms.org. It's now running on Backdrop, which is great. It's the first Drupal 7 to Backdrop upgrade I've done for an actual production site, so that was kind of exciting. I mean, it was a breeze, really. We had the more difficult part was we had to update API module, code filter module, and BU editor module. All three of those to Backdrop, because those are the three contributed modules that we were using on the Drupal 7 version of the site. But we got all those ported in a week and a half or so, and now they're they're all up in the contrib repository as contrib versions, and they're all working because we're using it on the API website. And now, yeah, it's great. We're also doing a little bit of cross collaboration with the Drupal community because I'm trying to figure out a way to improve the autocomplete on the API website. And autocomplete is something that they're still trying to improve in Drupal 8 as well. So we're having some little cross communication there, trying to figure out what the best auto-completion library is. Or actually, we've already figured out what the best auto-completion library is, but we need to figure out how to make it work. So we're trying to figure out together how to make that library work for our purposes.
Is that a JavaScript library or?
Yeah, the JavaScript library, the select2 JavaScript library. How the Drupal community had a solution that looked like it was going to work for Drupal 8, and it was in needs review. But then a new version of select2 came out and totally broke all of the implementation that they had written. And so now it's actually this big problem trying to figure out how to make select2 work for Drupal, and maybe it won't work at all. So I don't know. It's a hard problem, so it's a good one to be working together on.
Okay.
Anyway, but the API website totally converted. It's nice. Doc Wilmot's also been doing a huge amount of work documenting all of our change records and just writing general documentation, how to port code, how to port themes, and all of that information is now being populated on the API website. So it's getting better by the day, which is really exciting, considering there are changes between Backdrop and Drupal for certain, and it's really great that we've got we're moving towards a really comprehensive list of all of the changes that have occurred to make it easier for people to port modules and themes.
Speaking of change records, there are 2 issues on GitHub that have had changes recently, I think since 1.0 came out, that need change records. And there are a ton of change records on the API site that could use a review. So if anyone is interested in Backdrop, wants to see what our changes are, and is really good at reviewing writing as opposed to code, we could definitely use some help reviewing those too. So if you want to give those a read, you'll get an idea of the kind of changes that we're making and make sure that they're all legible, easy to understand, all of that stuff, because we could definitely use some more feedback on that. I have not given any of those a review since they've been up. I think we haven't gotten any complaints, which is good, but I also think we haven't had that many people using them. So it would be good to get some more eyes on them also. All right, our flagship website, backdropcms.org, we have been getting a little flack about that not being ported to Backdrop, so that's the next thing on our list. There's a few more contrib modules on our flagship website than there were on the API website, so those obviously need to be ported first, and that's what we're working on for that. I know there's a bunch of them already underway, but we've got a bunch more we've got to think about too. And then after that, we're going to need to worry about building pages for modules and themes, searching for modules and themes, that sort of thing. So we will start thinking about, again, the service for GitHub so that we can search GitHub as well as searching our own nodes and getting that all set up and ready to go there too. So we've got a handful of work to do there. And then other new things that we've added in the last week, we've had a discussion actually been going on for a couple of months about what we should do about a discussion forum. Forums are something that I personally feel haven't been super successful on Drupal.org. People seem to get forums confused with issue queues and you ask a question someplace and maybe no one will ever see it. Maybe it's the wrong place to ask the question, you don't get the right answer. But we've had a bunch of feedback from people in the Backdrop community that whether it worked on Drupal or not, we need a place for people to talk about Backdrop that is not an issue queue. People that can ask questions. Sorry, my computer is ringing for some reason. Can you hear that, or is it just me?
Yeah, we all can hear it.
How do I turn it off?
Don't know. Close the tab. Close your Gmail. I bet that's it.
We don't have any ringing in Gmail. It's Google Plus. It's weird. Anyway, Whoever was hung up. So sorry, everybody. Never had my computer start ringing. Anyway, what was I talking about?
Backdrop forums.
Right, so forums. So we've had this conversation for a while about where we're going to handle forums. We need one. We need a place for people who aren't technical to talk about Backdrop, to do things like, which theme are you using and what do you like and dislike about it? Things that aren't necessarily questions and answers, but are actually discussions. And when we first started this, we're like, oh, all of discussions will happen on Stack Exchange. And then we realized that Stack Exchange actually discourages discussions. It's for, you have a question, you get an answer. So that will happen anyway. People are going to be posting questions and answers on Stack Exchange over time because that's where people go for that kind of thing. But it's not quite the same thing as a discussion forum. And so we made this giant list of pros and cons for discussion forums, and the one that ended up being a winner for some reason ended up being Reddit. So we've created a Backdrop subreddit, and we're going to give it a try. We're going to use it for a couple weeks and see what we think. Jared has very nicely set up I don't know, he's moderating it or whatever that means over there. He's got a Backdrop branding on it. People are using it. We'll see what we think. We've got a couple of other options in the list too. There was no like definitive clear leader. Everything was all kind of about the same. Other suggestions included using a Facebook group, which is definitely friendly for non-technical people, but we might not get any technical people in there either. Zoho forums, which is something that I think the jQuery community ended up adopting. And Google Groups, which is an email list-based system. So I think depending on what your personal preference is, you might end up having a favorite place to go to do these things anyway. All of these things are immediately available and already set up. So if you want to try one and you think, oh, I'll never use Reddit, but I'll definitely use Facebook group, we have a Facebook group. You can use it. You can see if there's anyone on there. You can ask questions. You can answer questions. If you want to try and do, I think even we have a LinkedIn group if you want to use that, because that's where you spend your time. You can use that. We're just going to kind of say all of these things already exist. Let's see what people want to use. And I think for right now, most people are using the subreddit because that's where the majority of people are. So if you have questions, you want to talk about Backdrop, you can visit our subreddit. I put a link in the agenda, but it's also just reddit.com/r/backdrop. So if you want to log in there and see what people are talking about, that's a good place to go to have discussions. So yeah, there's also a link to the issue here, I think, too, if anyone wants to see the other things that we looked at. There were a lot of recommendations for us to use Discourse, which I think is what the Ubuntu community decided to use for forums. But that was not only software that we would have to host, build, maintain, and support ourselves, but also in a language that we don't understand. If we're going to host, build, maintain, and software ourselves, that should probably be Backdrop, which is also on the list. But we've decided not to invest in that just yet. We're going to start trying one of these previously existing forum solutions and see if we can get that going. So hopefully that'll be a good place for people to talk. We'll see how much it takes off and if it was the right choice, and if not, we can choose something else. So yeah, let's see. That's all we have on forums. Every Thursday after this meeting, we usually have a little Backdrop sprint, so you can meet us in the IRC. Our IRC channel is #Backdrop. You can tweet at us. We're at Backdrop CMS on Twitter. You can just start working on stuff. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. There's also now a contact form on our website. Crazy. But yeah, we all usually end up working together on Backdrop or Backdrop-related projects, and it's a good place to get help and feedback if you want to on Thursday afternoons. Other things, we have set up some Backdrop calendars in Google Calendars, which I was hesitant to do because I had to create yet another Google account to do it. But we do have a calendar specifically for Backdrop-friendly events. We don't have any Backdrop official events yet, so they're currently just events where we're going to be doing Backdrop-related things. On that calendar upcoming, we have Sand Camp, which is the San Diego Drupal Camp, which will be happening here at the end of February. They're going to be doing a Backdrop training the day before the camp. We've got a Backdrop super session during the camp. I don't think there's going to be any sprinting, but if there will be in lunch rooms or before or after or whatever, Nate and I will be there and we'll be sprinting alongside anyone who wants to work on Backdrop there. Another Backdrop-friendly event we have on the calendar is Mid-Camp in Chicago. We're going to be there anyway. I'm going to be giving a keynote that's unrelated to Backdrop, just about PHP in general. And we're going to be able to talk to everyone there. They do have a sprint. We're going to try and sponsor the sprint. We haven't heard back from them yet on whether they actually need sponsorship for their sprint or not. But that's also another place where people will be nice to us and talk about Backdrop. And then we also have our meeting schedule. So if you're interested in joining in on this meeting or in our design meeting, which happens fortnightly, those are both on that schedule too. And you can click, there's an iCal link for both of those in the agenda. We're also going to put the iCal links to both of those schedules on the forum in the subreddit. So if you want to grab those there, you can as well. So hopefully people who want to have more official updates of things Backdrop is doing will be able to subscribe to those. And then we also have an article coming up in the next issue of Drupal Watchdog. I've got to write a draft of it and get that ready for Monday. So guess what I'll be doing this weekend. And then that will be out about the same time as DrupalCon Los Angeles. So we're hoping that by then, Backdrop will have been out long enough that it'll be something that we can actually tell people it is ready. So by May, I'm hoping we'll have enough contrib modules so people can start building sites on this. Obviously, we're building a few sites on it now, but modules are what makes Drupal what it is, so modules need to be what makes Backdrop successful as well. So hopefully we'll get more modules and more people using it and more feedback and all that good stuff, and it'll be good to go by May. So that's what I'm hoping for. Let's see, is there anything else we should talk about in today's meeting? Do you want to add anything, Nate?
No, I don't have anything. I would say if you're looking to get involved in Backdrop but haven't yet, the easiest thing to do and the thing that we need the most help in right now is porting modules. So if you maintain any Drupal 7 modules, it would be great if you could take a look at porting them, or if you are just familiar with doing Drupal stuff, you can port any module. Join the Backdrop contrib group. Well, port a module or start porting a module, join the group, and then put it in the repository with all of the other modules. And that's the area in which there's the most work to be done. And it's the thing that would get adoption of Backdrop accelerated the most. So port away.
All right. Port away. Okay, well, I think that's all we had for today's meeting. This meeting ran longer than usual for whatever reason. I guess I was extra chatty. But yeah, you know how to reach us: IRC, GitHub, Twitter, contact form on the website. Thank you so much for everyone for your support so far. We've had a ton of people using Backdrop, a ton of people trying Backdrop, a ton of people porting modules. We really appreciate that, and we're super excited that you guys are excited too. So thanks, and talk to you next week.
All right. Bye. Thank you.